Today, we're diving into what it means to bring classic technology into the modern era with the brand new Commodore 64 Ultimate.
And joining us today is someone right at the center of that revival, Jim Squires from Commodore.
Hi, Jim.
Hey,
Welcome.
everybody. Good to connect. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. So, if you're listening, Jim Squires is Commodore's Chief Strategy Officer, Fire Putter Outer. I don't actually know. What's your official title, Jim?
Honestly, all of those work. I think my business card says Chief Strategy Officer. I like Chief Fire Putter Outer. That feels good. But
It's
yes,
very
yeah, no,
official.
it's a pretty broad role. So yeah, Chief Strategy Officer is a nice catch-all, I think, for sure.
Excellent. So, just before we jump into things, can you give us a little bit of a glimpse at what your role involves and what you kind of do in the
Yeah,
Commodore world?
absolutely. So to step it back just a little for the context. So the Commodore brand was reawakened, I suppose is the best way to put it, last summer by a great gentleman named Perry Fractic. He's our CEO. He had a wonderful vision for what this could be, and we're moving full steam ahead, which is very, very exciting. So my role, the best way I can kind of describe what I do is if Perry is piloting the ship, I'm helping to navigate the course, which ensures that we get to where he wants us to go, which is great. Similar to that, I have a counterpart, a chief operating officer named Emily McGinley, who's fantastic. And while I'm helping chart the course to where we go, I would say she's the one making sure that all hands on deck are doing what needs to do to get us there. So it's a really nice dynamic. We have a tremendous leadership team across the board. Our CTO, our CFO, all these folks are contributing. Just wonderful stuff to make sure we're living up to the new Commodore vision, which at the end of the day is all about things like the Ultimate, which we love, but also kind of building towards the future that we all wished for back in the 90s that it seems like has been side railed a little bit. So we're trying to build back. We'll see how it goes.
Definitely. And so let's start at the beginning because that's where
Please.
nostalgia lives. Jim, what's your first memory of the Commodore 64?
Okay, so this is going to be a little embarrassing to say out loud, and I'm going to put it out in the wild now, so I can't put the toothpaste back in the tube after this.
Fire putter
But
outer.
unlike most members of the Commodore 64 team, I did not own one growing up, and that is a shame I will wear till the day I die. However, I like to think I actually represent a really interesting and maybe even broader group of people who love Commodore, and those are the folks who desperately wanted one growing up, had friends who had them. For everyone who had a Commodore 64, they had 4 or 5 friends who didn't, who came over and played it and loved it and wanted it in their homes and their hearts. So I was that kid. Lots of memories. There are probably things that predate what I'm going to mention, but the thing that usually sticks out the most in my mind, and I love any opportunity to reach out to an audience with this question, so I'm hoping someone who hears this can help me. I have a memory probably 86, 87. I was probably like 7, 8 years old that window. And I used to spend every summer with my aunt and her kids. It was lovely, really good memories. And that was the most time I had with Commodore 64. My older cousin Matthew was about 10 years older than me. So like the cool teenager, mid 80s, love it. You can picture it. He belonged on the cover of Rad or things like that. We would hang out in the basement and he would introduce me to all the just the most incredible games. And there's one that's always stuck with me. And to this day, I cannot figure out what it is and it's killing me. So I'll paint the picture for you. It was a multiplayer racing game, horizontal split screen. So we've got, the one track or the one racer on top, the one racer below. And I'm picturing these almost like F1 style vehicles with big, big, big wheels in the back, almost comically large wheels. It had like a drag race energy to it, but there was also kind of construction kit energy to it. And like the closest I can come when I search is the Racing Destruction set, which is, on its own fabulous. All the construction set pieces that EA put out were incredible back then. But it doesn't, and like parts of it make me go like, maybe I'm mashing up a 7-year-old's memories of 2 different games into one game, which is possible. But when I play it, I'm like, man, this feels close, but it's not triggering the response I'm expecting it to. So if anyone knows what the heck I'm talking about, my God, please tell me. You will solve a 40-year-old mystery, and I would be very, very happy.
That's a direct order, by the way, if you're listening. Please help. This is an emergency. So was there a specific game, moment, or whatever? Maybe it's that one. Maybe it's the one you just said that made you realize that the Commodore 64 was something special.
my gut always goes to California games. It's the game I definitely have the most memories of playing on the Commodore 64. It's one of those games that everybody had, and every time you visited, it was like you could just take turns, going around the room, getting frustrated and performing poorly in California games. But the reality is, like, I could have had that experience on an NES as well. There were a lot, that game hit every platform, and I'm sure I did. So that's not a Commodore 64 experience that made me realize it was something special. I think the thing, and I'm going to say it was an experience I had on the Commodore 64, but I think it was what painted the difference for me between what you could do with console gaming and what you could do with a home computer. And that was Maniac Mansion. Because the reality is, as great as everything on a home console was back in the day, they were not designed for games that took patience, that you had to sit with, that you had to digest. Other video games were frantic and felt like a 22-minute episode of a TV show, whereas something like Maniac Mansion felt more like snuggling up with a good book. It was funny and it was fun, but it was that great, slow, puzzly feeling, and it really opened me up to what that could be. So my love of adventure games started there on the Commodore 64. Over the years, it definitely grew. I enjoyed plenty of Sierra stuff in the DOS era, things like that. I distinctly remember, and I don't know if this was every kid at the time, or I just hung out with like an extra, very specific type of nerdy group, and I'm delighted I belonged to it if that was the case. When you go and have sleepovers and things like that, I feel like other kids would be staying up all night, passing the controller around to play Bionic Commando or Mega Man 2, stuff like that. And we would sit around playing like King's Quest. We would, as 10-year-old boys, we would do that ridiculous thing of staying up way too late till the parents were asleep, and then firing up Leisure Suit Larry only to be hit with the age gating, which was the best age gating that ever happened. They were doing things like asking you questions about the Beatles. It's like, hey, you would know because you're old enough, right? It was fabulous. And it was pre-internet, so we could not just find the information. And Lord knows we sat there and guessed night after night. And I don't know many nights that we actually broke through, but Lord knows we tried. But yeah, Maniac Mansion on the Commodore 64 was really the pivotal point for me discovering my love of point and click. And over the years, that has never waned. I love a good slow game. I love a good meaningful game. You see so many things in the indie space nowadays that are sort of capturing that. I really feel like the whole industry is, knock on wood, hopefully moving back to indies and AA games that are more story driven as opposed to endless, multiplayer, free to play, transaction driven stuff. I'm seeing a slow renaissance happening. I kind of hope it takes off. Fingers crossed.
Like, why do you think the Commodore 64 still has that such a hold, like a strong emotional pull for people decades later?
Well, I mean, it's a right time, right place scenario, I think, for the Commodore 64 in the best way possible. It was, thanks to a number of reasons, it was a lot of people's first home computer, right? It is still to this day the single greatest selling home computer of all time, 27 million units. We hold the Guinness World Records for that, which is the weirdest thing I've ever said for a product I've been associated with, but very, very fun to say. There were a few things that led to that. One was, well, actually, I'll give you a good comparison. And it may actually be only the first time I bring up this totally unrelated device on this call, but it's where a lot of my love and passion goes to. So there's always comparisons. It reminds me a lot of the Game Boy. Why the Game Boy worked is a lot of why the Commodore 64 works. Because when the Game Boy hit the market, were there technically better handhelds? Absolutely. And I mean on a technical level, right? What the Lynx could do was incredible. But it took 8,000 batteries and lasted 4 minutes. The Game Gear was not as bad for that, but similar. The Game Boy came out and said, we're at a really low price point. We got there by compromising on things, but it also means you have battery life. You can have a wide library of games. It's not as complex to program for as these other titles. And it blew up. It was fabulous. It became the de facto, like when we talk about handheld games, the shorthand for that is Game Boy. Just like, in the 80s, which I don't know if either of you are old enough to remember, but we didn't really say video games in 1987. We said Nintendo. Like parents would be like, oh, they're playing Nintendo. It didn't matter what you were playing, right? Like it became the Coke or the Band-Aid of the era. And I feel like Game Boy is very much the shorthand for that. The Commodore 64 had a similar situation. It entered the market around the same time as, there was the Apple II. There were some IBM PCs on the market. It was very early versions of what we eventually became the norm. But we're talking thousands of dollars for these, or at the very least, like high three figures. And the Commodore 64 came out at $549, and within a year dropped to $399, making it a cost-effective alternative Commodore had already proven themselves with the VIC-20. Everyone knew that we had the chops. This was not a fly-by-night operation. And the reality is, too, that all of us sitting here think of Commodore. Maybe I'm assuming too much. I apologize. But I feel like the default assumption is, Commodore is a product that started with the Commodore 64, or that, started with computers. But like, Commodore's been around since 1958. It is a storied, established company. Parents who would be buying their kids, or buying just for themselves, a home computer for the first time, a lot of those folks worked in offices, and a lot of those offices were, swamped with Commodore typewriters, Commodore filing cabinets. It's Commodore Business Machines was the name of the company for a very long time, and there's a reason for that. So there was brand familiarity. There was an appropriate price point. What it was capable of was insane compared to what you would get on machines that cost 2 to 3 times as much. So it was a perfect storm moment, which was great. And then, similar to that, because it spread so widely based on those pieces, we ended up with, I'm going to say again, similar to that, similar to the Game Boy, it kind of had its Coke and Pepsi moment in that it was everywhere. Like, if you did not own a Commodore 64, you had a friend that did. That was it if you grew up in the 80s. So it was, at the time, I would argue, and I don't think anyone would dispute it, in the same way in the early 80s, we associated home consoles with Atari. I think we associated home computing with Commodore, and the brand was just as significant, if not more. The other piece that I also think is really fascinating when you look at the history of Commodore, and sorry, I know this isn't a video podcast, but everyone just saw me put my hand to my head daydreamily now because I'm thinking about it. I apologize. I have to paint a picture here for folks because I realize how ridiculous I must look, but here we go. So this is now where I get into one of my many other boring hyperfixations, and that's, again, as a child of the 80s, is the Cold War. And when the Iron Curtain started to come down, not specifically in Russia, but for a lot of the Eastern Bloc countries, it was their first opportunity to get their hands on Western computing devices. And so around 1990, sure, the Commodore 64 was 8 years old at that point, and in North America, it had been supplanted by the Amiga in a lot of ways. By MS-DOS was really sort of establishing itself for IBM PCs, which is, I have to explain to my kids the term IBM PC. I'm like, that was on every box, guys. I know it means nothing to you. IBM I have to explain IBM, despite still, I think, being a massive corporation. They're just not, the household name they used to be. But yeah, while the West was starting to explore those things, Commodore saw the opening and said, we have great computers. These people don't know what to do with them yet. Let's start delivering to Eastern Bloc market. And so there's a whole generation of coders that came up in like 1990 to 1992 in places like Yugoslavia and the Czech Republic, who made their bones on the Commodore 64. So this really, it is a product that managed to break beyond the North American and European, or at least Western Europe footholds that normally you equate with brands like this. So I think that really helped us establish a real global imprint, which is great. I mean, obviously, I don't believe we ever did as well in Japan as a lot of their own homegrown stuff. They had incredible stuff in Japan already, but yeah, there's a real universality to the Commodore brand and the Commodore 64 specifically. It's something I think anyone who was alive in the 1980s and above the age of 5 had an experience with the Commodore 64. So that's just something that sticks, I think, with you forever, right?
And there's something almost ceremonial about retro gaming. The sounds, the loading screens, even the limitations. Do you think modern gaming is missing some of that?
Yeah, very much so. So I'll tell you a little story. And as I knew we'd get back to Game Boy, I apologize. But I promise it all ties in, and it really paints a picture that you then stop and go, oh my God, that's the Commodore 64. And it really, really is. So outside of Commodore, one of the projects I've been involved in, I run like the teeniest, tiniest indie game studio you've ever seen. I'm telling you, if it was a Monopoly piece, we would fit inside the thimble. It is small. We're called Rocket Ship Park. We're based here in Ontario, Canada. And, we had initially made our bones making mobile games. We pivoted and started doing some larger kind of PC indie projects, things like that. And the team is really myself and my partner, who is the technical and creative wizard, if I'm being honest. I'm the guy who's really good at signing the checks and making sure the bills get paid. But he blows things out of the water. And we had a point a few years ago. We went out for dinner and he said to me, Jim, I think I've just lost my spark. Like, it doesn't interest me. It doesn't challenge me anymore. I'm not feeling it. It's like, I think we need to go on hold. I'm like, yeah, it's fine. No problem. We're both, it's the 21st century and everyone has to have 9 different hustles to compete. So it's one that we could all put pause on. It was fine. But I had asked him at that time, I said, if there's anything that would get you interested again, what do you think that would be? And he said to me, he's like, I think I'd like to try the challenge of programming Game Boy games one day. He's like, I'm not there yet, but maybe. I'm like, okay, no problem. And then because I'm a sly, sneaky guy who just like, how do we make the pieces dance? As chief strategy officer, let's put the word strategy up front for a moment. Before we had left the table at that dinner, I had slyly under the table, got my phone out and ordered him an analog pocket because I'm like, well, if he wants to go down this road,
Aww.
let's give him a new device he can play with. Let's make sure that, one day it'll be sitting there in the closet. 2 years from now, he will pull it out and start fiddling. Maybe. Let's give him the chance. And that's what happened. And now he is, I think we may have released just our 10th Game Boy title recently. He's absolutely prolific in that space. For anyone who's listening to this who might be big in the Game Boy homebrew community, he's the gentleman who made things like Cave Dave and Starseed. And we actually just did our first official port of Roguecraft, which is very exciting to the Game Boy Color.
Congratulations.
So it's great. But yeah, thank you. Appreciate that. And one of the things that when I talked to him about it, I'll tell you right now. So he's my friend Shane McCafferty. He's absolutely wonderful. E.G. Vroom on all the socials. If you're ever looking to follow him, he's a great follow. But he is such a good speaker on game development and design. And I can't always get him on a stage. Sometimes I just get him, over a coffee, and it's still just as good. And he will talk until you're blue in the face about how developing for retro is so crucial for any developer working in the space today. Because the reality is, we're at a point with things like Unity and Unreal, all these like engines that you can throw a little bit of money at every month, and it opens up the world to you. I hate to sound hyperbolic, but what you can do right now is literally the limits of your imaginations. It might take money and it might take time, but the tools are there now to realize pretty much anything we want to realize in a comparatively frictionless way. That sounds really great, but it's not. I will maintain, I don't know if you guys are, there's a million ways you could look at it, whether it's books or music or film, but I'll argue that any creator you love was at their best before they were a success, because the difference before and after was before they had an editor or they had a publisher or they had someone to answer to that was going to say no to them, that was going to say fix this, that was going to say change this. They were going to put them in a box, right? They were going to put on limitations that these folks now had to work within to make the best possible thing instead of being surrounded by yes men. I will maintain to this day, and I appreciate his name is not one we want to bring up a lot anymore, but I will maintain to this day that the best thing Neil Gaiman ever did was Sandman. And I know he's done great stuff since then, but the reality is when he wrote Sandman, he had an editor, and that editor said no to a lot of stuff and kept him on the tracks, right? Developing for retro systems is very much like that. The editor in this case is literally the constraints of the platform. So Shane will always talk about what's great about developing for retro is you're designing within that box. And that means to get what you want, you can still get what you want. You can still have the full dream, but to actually achieve it means, how do I find a corner of this box that nobody's found yet? How do I push the walls of this box out in a way nobody's done it? And you can, the proof is absolutely in the pudding. This is so far beyond concept, because if you look at the very best Commodore 64 games that came out in the 80s, and you look at what the community is making today, it is a night and day difference. You would think they're developing for different platforms, because we've now had, God, I wanted to say 30 years, but it's closer to 40, isn't it? My God. We've had 40 years to look at this and figure out what can work, what doesn't, to learn from modern game development and different approaches that we've taken there, to understand what's possible and what's not, and just do the incredible. So anyone listening to this that might be a modern game developer and you only worked in things like Unity and Unreal, and no disrespect to that or your work, it's incredible and it is hard, and I'm not saying it's not. Do yourself a favor and pick up a Commodore 64 Ultimate, or if you don't want me to be a commercial, pick up literally any platform, and just try. Just learn something new and push the envelope and push the boundaries and see what you can do. I think, and at the end, because you have those constraints, I think we're getting better games. That's it. Modern games today, it's interesting to me. So, okay, I have a soapbox I get on sometimes. So the games industry right now, in general, and this is no secret to anybody, I'm talking the wider games industry, not just the retro corner. I think we're actually very healthy right now in the retro corner. The modern games industry is going through probably the biggest crisis moment we've had since 1983, when the industry first collapsed. And it's for a lot of the same reasons. We've done that thing where as an industry, we learned from 1983 and we made changes, and that's why we decided to thrive. Like we were able to thrive again, and enough time has passed that we've forgotten those lessons. So we're seeing things like the abandonment of curation, right? Is one of the reasons we got here. Apple opened the doors to everybody. If you have $129, you can have an App Store developer membership and you can release whatever you want. Again, sounds great. Like limitless possibilities always sounds amazing. But the problem is sometimes limits are there for a reason, right? That flooded the market. I will argue and I will maintain that one of the best periods of gaming that ever existed were maybe the first 5 years of iPhone games. That was, it lined up almost like succinctly with the birth of that era of indie games. And so all of a sudden you got incredible developers, one person, 3-person studios who are able to make unbelievable games with new technology, pushing the boundaries of what people could do with the iPhone. Nobody even knew what to do with it yet, right? They're testing things, they're trying things. And the games that came out of that are among my all-time favorite games. There's no way around that. I was fortunate enough to be very close to that scene at the time. I started my bones in the games industry, as like so many people, as a games journalist. And my beat was mobile games, which was not a common beat. And so it made it a really fun niche to get to explore, and to also not feel led by the other coverage. Everybody in the world tells you how to think about Call of Duty. Nobody is telling you how to think about great old puzzle games like Rules on the iPhone or things like this, or my God, how is there an Indiana Jones game on here nobody's heard of and it's fantastic? All this sort of stuff, right? But as we got to a point, where all of a sudden with mobile games, my brain's breaking on this. It's such a big topic in my head and I'm trying to stuff it all back in. We got to a moment with mobile games where it shifted. There's always a balance in games where it's a balance of art and business. At the end of the day, what we're making is incredible. I will argue endlessly that video games are the most compelling form of art that exists in the 21st century. It's the only form of art that takes every discipline of art and combines it and then literally puts you in control of it, right? You have to immerse yourself in the art. It's really, really fascinating. And so that art piece always has to be there. If we lose that, if we lose why we're making and what we're making, there's nothing left. The business part has to exist because people have to make the money to keep making the games. There's just no way around that. That's how art works. Starving artist is a term for a reason. The problem with games has always been when the balance shifts too heavily to the business side, eventually, and this, I would argue, this is the economy self-correcting itself. Greed consumes all and breaks things. So 1983, that's how we got to where we got to. All of a sudden, anybody could publish games for the Atari, and that meant everybody would publish games for the Atari. I'm based in Toronto, and here in Canada, we had a store. May it rest in peace. It closed about 10 years ago, but it was everyone loves it forever. It was called Zellers. It was, I guess, our equivalent to a Walmart or Target. And I have in my storage unit Atari 2600 games made by Zellers. Like, it's like, what? Like, everybody who thought they could make a game and slap some money on it did it. The market flooded. All of a sudden, games that used to be able to pay a full price tag for were in bargain bins, for $5, $4, $2. And the market collapsed under the weight of that. And people couldn't or sort the wheat from the chaff, right? Nobody knew what was a good game, what was a bad game, unless you were a diehard who was reading magazines or things like that at the time, or listening to hopefully the recommendations of your friends. But the reality is, you go into a store, you look at something and say, sure, you came home with it, it was crap. And we broke the home console market. It took a very fresh approach from Nintendo to fix that at the time. Same thing happened here. I would say it's a 15-year tale that started with the iPhone launch and has ended where we're at today to get the industry where it's at. So yeah, like I said, there's a lot of things that go into it, but I think a big part of it was removing curation, which meant we flooded the market. By flooding the market, we had to drive prices down to compete. And so all of a sudden, we're now at a point in 2026, and we've been here for years, I couldn't even tell you how long, where a 99-cent iPhone game is going to fail. You cannot make money if you charge money for a game, period. That's insane to me. And without naming any names, I will say I've talked to people inside at Apple where I would ask questions like, is there anywhere this is working? How is this working? And the short answer is no. And when you look at like streaming service or subscription platforms like Apple Arcade, that's how that came around. Because these game developers who make genuinely great games on their platform, the ones that people actually should be playing, can't make money, so there's no point in being on them. Poor Jeff Minter, for God's sake. And I love Jeff Minter, man. Llamasoft is one of the all-time greats. Some of his best work were iPhone games, and it made no money. And at the end of the day, he ended up pulling all the games because he didn't want to pay the $129 annual fee to keep them on the App Store because they just weren't making any money. Like that's insane to me that those games are now lost forever, you know? And so many great games are because of that, because games preservation is another area that nobody is investing in with. And I will say it again, props to Atari, with the exception of Atari, who bought Digital Eclipse, who I still maintain they're like the Criterion collection of video games. They're doing more for preservation than anybody else out there. I think preservation is so important. And at Commodore, that's actually within my scope, is digital preservation. That's something I'm really, really interested in, and trying to figure out what we can do to bring back classic Commodore games and make sure that they remain playable forever. It's certainly not our main focus, you know, as a platform. The reality is it's a thriving ecosystem, and it has been since the bankruptcy back in 1994, because we have the single best community out there. And I know that sounds like I'm blowing smoke, but like literally the only reason the company was able to come back as it was because the community acted as stewards of the brand for, oh God, I'm doing the math in my head. I don't want it. It makes me feel so old. 31 years. That's a very long time to continue making hardware projects, to continue developing new games, to do meetups, to stay involved, to run magazines and put out books. And like the Commodore brand never went away. And thank God to that community. So for that community, we want to make sure that our focus is on new projects, right? Developing new things, making sure that there are great new games, making sure that we can support those developers and publishers. And honestly, any who are listening to this right now, if you haven't talked to me yet, reach out, please. There's a contact form on our website, or if you know Nancy, just message her and she will give you my email. I'd be very happy to give that out.
I'm just so curious because you're talking about that intersection between preservation and reinvention. So how does the Commodore 64 Ultimate fall into that?
No, that's a great question. So the first thing, let's talk about the preservation piece. What's great about the Ultimate? So the Commodore is, for anyone listening who does not know, I hate assumed knowledge. I was taught the term assumed knowledge a few years ago, and I love it. Like when you talk and you just assume people know what you're talking about, that's not healthy. So a little bit of a primer so people know what the Ultimate is. The Commodore 64 Ultimate launched last December 2025. And it is forgive me for saying so, flawless recreation of the Commodore 64. You've seen a lot of projects over the years, not just for Commodore, but from everybody, where you'll get genuinely great devices. You know, I still use to this day my Super Nintendo Mini that they put out a few years ago. I've been replaying A Link to the Past in my brain for the last month, and I'm dying to fire that thing back up and get going again. I love these things, but the reality is they are intended to preserve, which I, again, 100% love, the games more so than hardware. Right? Hardware preservation is actually really, really difficult, especially because, and you would think like, oh, you could make this stuff 40 years ago. It's got to be easy to do now. Actually, that makes it very hard because the way things have been manufactured has changed drastically in the last 40 years. The things that even exist, like to manufacture them, they're not there anymore. You know, the way, like, for example, the way a SID chip was made, from what I understand, and I'm pleased if I get this wrong, everyone, I apologize. There's no way to do that today. Right? Like that's where we're at, you know? So there are certain things where it's not doable. You know, the reason CRTs aren't back is because nobody has the manufacturing capability to make CRT televisions anymore. It just doesn't exist anywhere in the world, right? Like things have changed. So to preserve hardware, and again, this is where we go back to that incredible community Commodore has, right? When you see so many of the hardware projects that happened over the last 30 years, those happened because people wanted to make sure that their Commodore 64s could keep operating, right? So it was like, hey man, we can't keep buying 10 or 12 used units somewhere to strip them for parts. And you know, what can we do to come up with replacement parts? What can we do to make things that will make this go, that will make it last longer, that will help update it for what we need, things like that. You know, it is 2026 right now. And unless you are a giant dork like me, and I will share with the camera because of course I'm a giant dork, you probably do not have a CRT sitting on your desk right now. Which, you know, if you had a Commodore 64, the original, that's what you would need. So, you know, there have been modifications that would do things like add HDMI ports or, you know, add better storage, things like this, all sorts of stuff you could do. So the Commodore 64 Ultimate is, in many ways, it's sort of born of that community. It's born of a lot of those projects. We are powered by an FPGA board that, you know, initially was a community project, right? It was a great gentleman named Gideon. His board is what's inside our machine, and he's a member of the Commodore team now. It's great. So we're able to ensure hardware preservation, and a big part of what makes the Ultimate great for hardware preservation isn't just recreating the original experience flawlessly. It's ensuring that everything that you already own from back in the day will still work with the modern hardware. So if you have a joystick from 1984, if you have the old disk drive or a data set or any of these things, they're going to work flawlessly with this device. If you have a homemade controller that worked on your Commodore 64 that you bashed together one day in 1997 in your garage, it'll work on the Ultimate. We claim 99.9% compatibility because we appreciate there's probably going to be some outlier out there. But that being said, we actually stand by it so much that I am going to Coventry in the UK next week for Zap Live. I'm very excited. And as part of our presence there, we are doing the first ever Ultimate Challenge, which is basically like, hey, Commodore community, this is, and Zap Live is like, it's all Commodore fans, all enthusiasts who've been around forever. It's exactly our market. All of our folks that we love. So, hey, bring in everything you got, test it on our Commodore 64 Ultimate, see if you can find something that doesn't work. If you do, you're going to win something. It's kind of like our update of the Pepsi Challenge, but heavier because you got to bring stuff with you. So,
and more fun.
Yeah, I hope so, right? More fun and sort of quietly. Also, not that I want people to find the 0.01% of things that don't work, but it'd be great if they do, because then that's something that we can look at and try to figure out in our next firmware update. Like, what can we do to address that? What can we do to fix that, right? So yeah, that's the hardware side. That's really important. The game side is a little more complicated, which I know sounds like it shouldn't be. But as anybody who has ever had to deal with retro games from the business side knows, it is generally a tangled mess of intellectual property rights. And so we're not out there at the moment, and it's not in our roadmap. It's not something we're intending to do. We're not out there trying to scoop up IP. We're not trying to buy IP or own it. We don't want to be a game publisher. We want to support game publishers, right? We want to help the people who are already out there making these great products get things out into the wild. We also want to help studios, or even folks who were formerly studios who have moved on, who hold classic IP. We want to help them find new audiences, and that, whether that is on the Ultimate or through other paths, right? Like it's a case of come talk to us. If you hold IP for classic Commodore games, stuff that was a huge hit on the C64, my God, ask Nancy for that email. Seriously, I cannot stress it enough. I really want to talk to you. I'm going to be shaking hands with everybody at Zap Live next week, and I think it'll be like, hi, I'm Jim. Do you own any classic IP I should know about? So, we want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to help old games remain preserved and exist out there in any and every way that they can. I genuinely cannot say enough good things about what Digital Eclipse does. And separate from all of this, I am a giant film nerd, and I have a stack of Criterion DVDs about a mile high. I spent a solid decade yelling at anyone who would listen to me, why don't we have a Criterion collection for games? Game preservation matters. They exist. Criterion exists because film preservation wasn't being done adequately, and they helped solve a lot of that. I'm like, where's the game equivalent of that? And then Digital Eclipse dropped their first Goldmaster series, and I went, oh, someone's doing it. And they've consistently demonstrated how good they are at that since. Mike Mika's running that studio, and I have never met a sharper dude who understands the value of preservation more in my life. Side note, if anyone ever gets the chance, Mike Mika's office is the single greatest museum of video game stuff you'll ever see. It has everything you can imagine, but then it's the things you don't imagine that blow your mind. I'll stand in there and I will look up into the rafters and I will see stacks of Slurpee cups from 1982 that have Atari characters on them. I'm like, what am I looking at? This place is amazing. But yeah, so game preservation is so vital, and I've always been keen on playing whatever part I can in that. So yeah, now that I'm so fortunate to be in the position I'm at Commodore, I'm really keen to start helping IP holders who have classic Commodore games in their libraries, in their catalog, to help them get those games back out to the public and see what we can do and how we can help them to ensure that those games don't disappear. Right, that's really the most important thing. The number of games I love that don't exist anymore and have no way to be played other than through piracy and things like that. And like I don't besmirch people who download ROMs. I get it. It's very hard to play any of this stuff legally in 2026, but that's actually the problem. The problem isn't that they're downloading stuff, gray legally, I suppose. The problem is that there aren't legal alternatives for them, right?
Access, yeah.
Right, exactly. I know personally, if it's a choice between downloading a game I loved as a kid illegally and playing it on, oh my God, why am I forgetting the name of the thing I use? So sorry, RetroArch, right? Firing up RetroArch and playing ActRaiser or something like that. Or an ActRaiser is a terrible example because Konami still owns it, but you know what I mean. At the end of the day, I can stream any song I want on Spotify, but also if I love and support an artist, and you will see, like I have a solid collection of soundtracks here and albums and all that jazz. And yeah, it's way too many game soundtracks I'm realizing as I go through it. That's embarrassing. But that's okay. I am 8-bit puts out amazing stuff. I can't say no to it. That's all right. But yeah, so if I can't speak for everybody, but it does seem to me that I think most people would agree that if they can support the creators they love, they are happy to do it. And so I'm really keen, and Commodore in general is really keen to help these classic IP holders create opportunities to do that, right? Rather than folks needing to just go and download a D64 ROM or something like that. So we're doing what we can for sure. I also think, and this is maybe me assuming too much, but I think that there is a general pushback right now. And see, this is now, okay, we're officially going to like social theory. I apologize. This is now elevating too high. But I think as a society, we are starting to see a real solid rebuff against the way the world has gone in the last 20 years. And part of that involves both art and technology. So I think that, and like for me, if I were to pinpoint a moment that tech started going the wrong way, it was probably the birth of social media. I think other people might say the internet. I think regardless, there was a time when we all grew up where the future was an exciting thing. And we look forward to that. And technology was a big part of that. We could only imagine what technology would eventually bring us. I have 2 kids that are both in college now. So we're talking like, well, one of them is 19 in a couple of weeks. The other one's 21. They have grown up in a post-social media age. And so they have never in their entire lives had a sense of tech optimism. They've always grown up with technology as problematic, as the villain, as greedy, as damaging. And that whole generation right now, like we're seeing it. It's so funny when you go through all of history, whenever something truly breaks, you end up seeing it sort of naturally heal. Like there's almost God, I'm getting into Taoism now. We're even going further than social theory. But yes, essentially, at the end of the day, there's a natural order to things, and hopefully balance can be restored. And I think what we're seeing right now with Gen Z and Gen Alpha is we're seeing some of that balance restored. We're seeing the rejection of the way things are currently done. We're seeing a lot of these folks staying off social media or only using the messaging on social media to stay in touch with their friends. We are seeing them abandon streaming platforms. I live in Toronto and I walk around every day, and at least once a day, I see someone 25 or under with a pair of corded headphones hooked up to usually like an iPod Shuffle or some other MP3 player that they're actively wearing on their body like a badge of honor, right? People are understanding the damage that technology has done, and they are trying to repair it for themselves. They're trying to find paths that are healthy and safe. And I love that. And I know Perry, our CEO, also is very, very passionate about that. This is an area we're really keen on. There's a reason our tagline right now is the future we were promised, because at the end of the day, having things that are purpose-driven, technology that we use instead of technology that uses us is really, really crucial. And I think you are seeing something similar when it comes to video games themselves. So this is now the art piece, right? I think we kind of touched on it a little bit earlier. This move, where the balance has shifted so far to business over art. When initially it was mobile games, it is very much AAA games now, and I'm sorry to knock that industry. And I play them and enjoy them just as much as anybody else. Mind you, a much smaller selection than I think the mainstream. But I am halfway through and very bored of Ghost of Yotei right now. So I will fully admit I will spend money on. I'll spend $100 on a game. But that industry has shifted so heavily towards business. It is about what's worked before, let's do it again. Let's up the graphics, let's up the spend. And so let's figure out how we can monetize it better. It's not about what can we create that's never existed. And that's what people want. They want creativity. They want imagination. They want things that are unique and different and bespoke. They want real experiences, right? And back in the day, that's what you got in video games. A series was the exception, not the rule back then. And when you got a series, it evolved, right? Look at Mario Brothers. From literally every iteration of the first 4 was a giant leap forward. And I am aware that 2 is a weird outlier, but it's about progress. The first 3 Legend of Zelda games, right? Massive, massive progress. I'm also always going to say great things about Nintendo because to this day, they're the exception that proves every rule, as far as I'm concerned. They focus on what's new, what's interesting, what's creative. They don't care about pushing technical boundaries or spending a lot of money. And there's a reason that they continue to be top dog, right? Like they get it. Their model is the model that works. It's not the model of, 17 Call of Duties a year, right? Like that's just it's not sustainable. It doesn't make sense. The canary in the coal mine for me, and I always hope I have my facts right on this. And every time I check, it seems like I do, but now that I'm saying them on a podcast, I bet someone will catch me. And please do. I will be happy to correct myself going forward if I'm wrong. But the canary in the coal mine for me of the current form of the games industry and the AAA piece was the year, maybe it was 2022, 2021. I forget exactly which year. The year Spider-Man 2 came out, which again, banger of a game. Loved everything about Spider-Man 2. Absolutely phenomenal. It was the #1 PlayStation, like first party PlayStation title of all time in terms of sales. It made more money than any other PlayStation published game had. And it ran a loss and they laid off 20% of the studio. If the most successful game you have ever put out didn't make money, we're broken. Like who's doing that anymore, right? Where are the bean counters? If we're so obsessed with business, we're so obsessed with like the scale of money and not the realities of money, right? Are people even looking at the install base before they're making these decisions? You know, can something be recouped? Just throw money at it. It'll be a huge hit. That's what everyone keeps saying. I think the future, I think where the industry is right now, we're in a really, really fantastic moment. I liken it to a phoenix. And we were here before. This was 83 to 85, right? We're in this fantastic phoenix moment where we get to decide what the industry looks like going forward. And so the question is, are we going to let the AAA studios of the world make that decision for us? Or are we going to get out there and make the things that we believe should exist? And this is why I genuinely believe that we're at the dawn of an indie renaissance and a AA games renaissance. Helldivers 2 was a massive hit and did not have a massive budget to get there compared to other titles, right? Like this is scale matters and creativity matters. Hey, the business is still part of it, but let's start making smarter business decisions, right? The smarter business decision to me, if I had millions of dollars to invest in games, I would be saying, what is a game that people are going to remember forever, rather than what's a game that's going to make me money tomorrow, right? Think about legacy, not bottom line. And I think that retro games were very much focused on that, especially if we're talking the early Commodore scene, because we were not talking about massive publishers back then. So much of what we remember is bedroom coders, right? So much of what we remember is tiny stuff. We talk about Llamasoft, right? I mentioned Jeff Minter earlier. I mean, my God, go watch the documentary Heart of Neon. Like he was late teens. He was making these things. He was doing it in his bedroom. And to this day, he's still doing it from his farm. It's him and Giles. They're doing stuff together. They did not scale it. They could have, I'm sure, at some point if they wanted to. They were very successful, but they said, no, we're gonna make stuff that interests stuff. How about this? Here's what they do. Here's what every game developer I love does. And I will say that this should be every developer's mantra. Make games you want to play, right? You know there's an audience of one, no matter what. If you are making something that would make you happy, there's definitely someone else out there who's going to like it. Whether or not there are a lot of someone else out there who's going to like it, I don't know. But the only way you find out is by making it. And I would much rather that than people looking at what's already working and throwing money at that to try to do the same thing again. And I think you're also seeing a younger generation who now like I said, I've got kids in my 20s. These are the first kids that grew up with parents who grew up with video games, right? Like that's it. Now we're into like second generation, third generation game players, which is very, very cool. And so they get opened up to the stuff that their parents are playing, right? And they're more interested in smaller stuff, curated stuff. Like both my kids love video games, but like all they're playing right now is Tomodachi Life because it's not like anything else that's out there, right? It's, it's different. And again, Nintendo, applaud them for doing something different. People love our stuff like Animal Crossing, games like Stardew Valley do well. They always love the weird quirkiness of our Mii stuff. Let's bring the Tomodachi brand back to life. We only did one for the DS, to heck with it. Let's do it again. That's it. They could be sitting here playing. I'm so delighted to say I couldn't tell you what AAA title's big this week. Whatever that is, but that's of no interest. They want to find the stuff that's really unique and speaks to them personally. And so we've got to get back to treating it like an art form, right? Understanding that not every book is going to be a book everybody reads, right? You pick the books that make sense for you. You should pick the games that make sense for you. Stop trying to make things with a broad appeal that can make as much money as possible off everybody.
If the Commodore 64 was released today for the first time, would it still become a cultural icon, or is historical context part of the appeal?
That's a really good question. So if I'm going to answer, I think like the reality is everything we talked about earlier about what has made the Commodore 64 such an icon, like we can't create those moments in time, right? That was very much, it was the right product. All success in this world is about having opportunity and seizing it correctly. The opportunity was right place, right time, but we were able to deliver the product that captured that, right? That's why the Commodore 64 worked originally. I think today, if we're talking about the Commodore 64 as it exists, this classic vintage computing style experience, the Commodore 64 is great. It's a challenge. It's an era when technology used to challenge us in good, positive ways and make us smarter, not dumber, right? Listen, it's great to use Windows 11 or Mac OS, and which literally both of what I have open on my desk right now. Sorry, I have my Windows PC behind me, and I'm talking to you on my MacBook. So I'm again, pot calling the kettle black. I should be on Linux, and I know that. But the ease of these things is wonderful, but when you make things too easy, you are no longer challenging yourself in a way that is helping to evolve you as a person, right? Like we learn through hardship. And I know that hardship is a terrible word for it, but like the reality is when I got my Commodore 64 Ultimate, I realized, oh man, I actually don't know how to control the volume on this thing because I was really enjoying the onboard sound. Like I know I could hook it up to, my TV to get sound and all that, but I dig the onboard sound on this thing. And I'm like, I have no idea how to adjust the volume. And it honestly took me 15 minutes of fiddling in the menus and I felt like I'd accomplished something. I'm like, oh, there's the dopamine hit of doing something and learning something. And it was literally just adjusting volume on this thing, right? So I think that we have lost the ability to learn that, well, we had an opportunity to learn things in a way that we don't anymore. And I think that needs to come back. I think that has been a lot of the reason we find struggle is because we are not forced to develop critical thinking in the way that we used to be.
You need to come back so we can have a comprehensive discussion about the ontology of video games and get really, really deep and talk about all the social theory and all of the the business side, but the art side and all of the fuzzy intersections.
God, I would love that.
We need to do this.
Oh, I would love that. I would love that. Well, I'll tell you, yes, please. And I have so many stories, and I have to figure out which ones I'm actually able to tell. But yes, I would absolutely love that. But yeah, I mean, the very short version of the answer to your question, I'll actually try to answer this one quickly. I think that if the Commodore 64 did not exist and it came out today, I think it would be very successful as a cottage industry product. I think that there are people who are craving this sort of an experience. I think if there was like a new vintage computer that dropped that offered this kind of experience that people hadn't had before, I think there are people that would really appeal to. But it would be like a small scale success. It would be a lowercase c Commodore success as opposed to an uppercase C, which, by the way, uppercase C Commodore success, just noting, if you didn't grow up on the bread bin Commodore, last week we did announce we're doing the Commodore 64C Ultimate. It's coming out later this year. It's open for pre-order, so I got to throw that out there. I would not be doing my job if I didn't. So with the C64C, we actually acquired the original tooling that was used in 1986 to make the molds. So the molds for the new one are being made with the exact same tooling from 1986, and we have footage from when Perry went and toured the factory and inspected the moldings and all that. It's very cool stuff.
Where can listeners go to learn more about the Commodore 64 Ultimate?
Oh, what a wonderful question. The short answer is Commodore.net. Come join us. You can pre-order your Commodore 64C Ultimate. You can buy your Commodore 64 Ultimate. We've got lots of fun merch and accessories and adapters and all the jazz that you would ever want, and it's growing. We actually, if you visit the website today, and you visited it even 3 weeks ago, you will be in for a wonderful treat. We just launched our new website. I know that's such a silly thing to get excited about, but honestly, it looks great, it feels great, it runs great. So yeah, come on over, take a peek, and it's also going to give us a lot of flexibility to do fun new things as time goes on. So keep an eye out. We have things in the works. It'll be good times.